Under the bed. I moved into the new apartment on a Monday, exhausted from hauling my life across the city in the back of a borrowed truck. The place was nothing special, just another aging rental in a complex that had probably been nice a few decades ago but had since settled into a quiet state of neglect. The floors creaked when I walked, the pipes groaned in the walls, and the windows let in a draft no matter how tightly I shut them. But the rent was cheap, and it was mine. For now. The first night was when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping coming from under my bed. At first, I thought it was just the usual sounds of an old building adjusting to the temperature drop at night. Wood expands, contracts, breathes. I turned over, pulled the blanket higher, and tried to ignore it. But the sound didn't stop. It was faint, deliberate, almost mechanical. 3 soft taps, a pause, then 3 more. I felt my stomach tighten. Mice? No, it was too steady. Some kind of plumbing issue? That didn't make sense either. The more I listened, the more I became aware of something else. The sound wasn't just under my bed. It was beneath it. Deep beneath it. As if there was another layer to the floor, something hidden just out of sight. Annoyed, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. The hardwood was cold under my feet. I took a breath and crouched down, angling the light into the darkness. At first, I saw only dust and the usual forgotten debris that gathers in unseen places, an old sock, a crumpled receipt, a few stray coins. But then my light caught something else. A box. It was small, wooden, shoved against the farthest corner, as if someone had intentionally hidden it there. The wood was dark, aged, and the lid was slightly ajar. My pulse quickened as I reached for it, dragging it toward me. It wasn't heavy, but there was something unsettling about the way it felt in my hands, too smooth, too cold. I opened it. Inside, nestled in the dust-lined bottom, was a single object. A pocket watch. The casing was silver, tarnished with age, but still intact. The glass face was uncracked, and beneath it, the hands ticked steadily, backward. I stared, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. The second hand moved in reverse, smooth and precise, ticking away time in the wrong direction. A chill ran through me. I should have put it back. Should have shut the box under the bed and forgotten I'd ever found it. But instead, I turned it over in my hands, feeling the weight of it, the coolness of the metal against my palm. There was an inscription on the back, barely visible in the dim light. Time is borrowed. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. The tapping had stopped. The room was silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but waiting. I set the watch on my nightstand, turned off the flashlight, and climbed back into bed. Sleep came slowly, uneasy and fractured. And when I woke the next morning, I had the distinct, bone-deep feeling that something had changed. I just didn't know what. The second night, the tapping returned. The second night, the tapping returned. I had almost convinced myself that the first night had been a fluke, a trick of my overtired brain adjusting to a new space. But as soon as I turned off the light, the sound started again. 3 soft taps. A pause. 3 more. I sat up, my pulse hammering. The watch on my nightstand was still ticking in reverse, its steady rhythm at odds with the creeping dread curling in my stomach. I grabbed my phone again, turning on the flashlight, but this time, I didn't look under the bed. Instead, I waited, holding my breath, listening. The sound didn't stop. It wasn't random. It wasn't the house settling or pipes knocking. It was a pattern. A deliberate, calculated pattern. I forced myself to move, to swing my legs over the bed, to press my feet against the cold wooden floor. The moment I did, the tapping ceased. I waited. Nothing. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair, trying to ignore the sweat pricking at the back of my neck. Maybe it was the watch. Maybe some old mechanical function inside was making the noise. It made more sense than the alternative, because the alternative meant something was beneath me. Something that knew when I was listening. I picked up the watch, running my fingers over its worn metal surface. The inscription on the back felt deeper now, like the letters had been carved freshly into the silver rather than worn down with time. Time is borrowed. A shiver crawled down my spine. I placed the watch back in the box and shoved it into my nightstand drawer. Out of sight. Out of mind. But sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt something just outside my perception, something watching. The air in the room felt heavy, thick like fog, and the darkness pressed in harder than it should have. I turned onto my side, pulling the blanket up, focusing on the steady sound of my own breathing. Then, right at the edge of my awareness, I heard it. Not tapping this time. Breathing. Deep. Slow. Wet. Coming from directly under my bed. I froze, my entire body locking up, my breath catching in my throat. I wanted to believe it was my own breath, my own panicked inhalations echoing back at me. But it wasn't. It was too slow, too steady, too deliberate. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. The breathing continued, a slow exhale followed by an even slower inhale. My skin crawled, my muscles screaming for me to do something, to move, to run, to fight, but I couldn't. I lay there, paralyzed by the sheer unnatural wrongness of it. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The room fell into silence, thick and suffocating. I counted in my head, forcing my breath to steady, forcing my limbs to loosen. Slowly, painfully slowly, I reached for my phone, careful not to make a sound. I turned on the flashlight and aimed it toward the floor. The light hit the wooden panels, casting long, distorted shadows. The space under my bed was empty. No box. No watch. And yet, I could still feel it. Something was there. Watching. Waiting. The air smelled different now, tinged with something old and rotting, like damp wood and decayed flowers. My stomach twisted, nausea rising in my throat. I forced myself to move, to slide out of bed as carefully as possible, my feet touching the floor with agonizing slowness. I needed to get out. But as soon as I stood, the temperature in the room plummeted. The floor beneath me groaned, not like old wood settling, but like something shifting beneath the surface. Like something waking up. I stumbled backward, my legs hitting the edge of the bed. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out everything else. And then, right as I turned to grab my jacket, my keys, anything, the tapping resumed. But this time, it wasn't coming from under the bed. It was coming from inside the walls. From inside the floor. From everywhere. The third night, I stopped trying to sleep. By the time the third night arrived, exhaustion had settled deep into my bones. I had spent the entire day trying to rationalize what had happened, searching for some kind of explanation that would make sense, something logical, something grounded in reality. I had checked under the bed again in the morning, found nothing but dust, and convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, my sleep-deprived brain had conjured the whole thing. After all, fear had a way of distorting reality, twisting the mundane into something terrifying. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows stretched long across the walls of my apartment, that fragile logic crumbled under the weight of something far more primal, something my body understood before my mind would accept. I didn't turn off the lights this time. I didn't even try to pretend that sleep would come. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bed, every muscle in my body coiled tight, every breath measured and slow. The watch, I had thrown it back into the box that morning, locked it away inside the closet, convinced that putting distance between me and that damned thing would sever whatever hold it had over me. But the moment the first sound came, an almost imperceptible creak beneath the bed, I knew it hadn't worked. It started slow, just like before. A faint shifting, as if something was adjusting its weight in the narrow space beneath me. I didn't move, didn't even flinch, just sat there listening as the noise grew louder, more deliberate. The tapping returned, rhythmic and measured, but this time, it wasn't just under the bed. It was behind me. Inside the closet. Inside the walls. As if the entire apartment had come alive, filled with something unseen, something waiting. And then, the whispering began. It wasn't words, not at first. Just the sound of breath moving through unseen lips, just a voice-shaped absence of sound that sent ice racing through my veins. It surrounded me, layered and overlapping, growing in volume yet never quite forming anything coherent. My throat felt dry, my skin crawling as I forced myself to stand, forced my legs to carry me toward the door. But the moment my fingers touched the doorknob, the whispering stopped. The silence that followed was worse. A stillness so complete, so unnatural, that it felt like the entire world had paused, like something was listening just as intently as I had been moments ago. My pulse slammed against my ribs, my breath a thin, shallow thing in my chest. And then, just as I thought maybe, just maybe, it was over, I heard it. A single word. Spoken from directly behind me. Borrowed. The voice was wrong, too low, too close, as if it had been spoken inside my own head. Every hair on my body stood on end, my stomach lurching with a violent twist of nausea. I spun around, expecting, what? A figure? A shadow? Something tangible? But the room was empty. The wall stood bare, the closet door still shut, the bed just a bed. And yet, the air felt different, charged with something unseen, something vast and terrible pressing in from all sides. I bolted. I didn't think, didn't hesitate, just ripped the door open and sprinted down the hallway, my bare feet slamming against the cold wooden floor. The apartment around me blurred in my peripheral vision, walls seeming too long, doorways too narrow, everything stretching and twisting like some kind of waking nightmare. By the time I reached the front door, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the lock. But I did. And I threw the door open, stepping into the blessedly normal hallway beyond, heart hammering so hard I thought my ribs might crack. I didn't go back inside. Not that night. Not the next. But the thing is, somewhere deep in my gut, I knew it wasn't over. Because when I finally gathered the courage to return, when I finally stepped back into that apartment, everything seemed untouched, exactly as I had left it. Except for one thing. The watch. It was no longer in the closet. It was waiting for me. Sitting neatly on the center of my bed. And the time on its face was still counting backward. I stood frozen in the doorway, my breath locked in my chest as I stared at the watch resting on my bed. It shouldn't have been there. I had locked it away, shoved it deep inside the closet, buried it beneath piles of clothes and boxes. And yet, here it was, waiting. The small, delicate hand still ticking backward, counting down to something I didn't understand but could feel pressing against the edges of reality, something ancient and wrong. I didn't move. I barely even breathed. The air in the apartment felt thick, charged with a presence I couldn't see but knew was there, lurking in the unseen spaces, watching from the corners where the light didn't quite reach. My brain scrambled for a rational explanation, some way to convince myself that I had done this, that I had simply forgotten, that stress and exhaustion were playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. And then, I made the mistake of blinking. In that fraction of a second, something changed. The air shifted, colder now, carrying with it the faintest scent of damp earth and something metallic, something like rust or blood. My vision blurred at the edges, the room around me warping like heat rising off asphalt. And when I looked back at the bed, the watch was gone. The nausea hit instantly, a sickening wave rolling through my stomach, my knees nearly buckling beneath me. I forced myself to step forward, each movement slow, deliberate, my body screaming at me to run, to get the hell out before something I couldn't fight caught up to me. But I didn't. I reached out, fingers brushing against the sheets where the watch had been just seconds ago, and felt something else instead. Something warm. Something pulsing. I yanked my hand back, my breath shuddering from my lungs as I stumbled away from the bed. My fingers tingled where they had touched it, skin. It had felt like skin. But that was impossible. There was nothing there. And yet. The whispering returned. Not from under the bed this time. Not from the walls. From inside me. A thick, layered sound, twisting through my ribs, coiling around my spine, threading itself through my veins. It wasn't speaking words, not anymore. It was just there, a presence, a weight pressing down on my bones, something trying to settle inside me, to make a home beneath my skin. My body seized, muscles locking, every nerve screaming as the pressure grew stronger, heavier, my vision tunneling into darkness. I could feel myself slipping, something pulling me down, dragging me toward an edge I couldn't see. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The weight lifted. The whispering faded. The air thinned. And the watch was back. Not on the bed this time. On my wrist. The leather strap was cold against my skin, the metal face gleaming faintly in the dim light of the apartment. My pulse roared in my ears as I lifted my arm, staring in disbelief, in horror, as the hands on the watch continued their slow, relentless countdown. I tried to take it off. My fingers fumbled at the strap, nails digging into the buckle, tugging, pulling, but it wouldn't budge. The leather felt like it had fused to my skin, seamless, unbreakable. My breathing hitched, panic rising in my throat as I clawed at it, desperate, frantic. But the watch didn't move. And then, a voice. Not a whisper this time. A low, guttural chuckle. Coming from beneath the bed. I didn't look. I wouldn't look. I ran. Out of the bedroom, through the apartment, slamming the door behind me as I stumbled into the hallway, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. My vision blurred, my lungs burning as I sprinted down the corridor, down the stairs, out into the cold, open night. I didn't stop running until the city swallowed me whole. I didn't go back. Not for a long time. But the thing is, it didn't matter. Because wherever I went, wherever I tried to hide, whatever city I ran to, the watch stayed with me. Always ticking. Always counting backward. And every night, no matter where I slept, I could still hear something breathing under the bed.